Welcome to today's webinar focusing on equitable public engagements. Before we begin, please note that we have simultaneous interpretation available. To select your preferred language, you will find a globe icon at the bottom of your screen for the interpretation, which you can use to select the language you'd like to listen to. Nous avons une interprétation simultanée pendant ce webinaire.
We do have simultaneous interpretation available during this webinar.
Pour sélectionner votre langue préférée, l'anglais ou
In
le
order to
français,
choose your
vous
preferred
trouverez
language,
une
either
icône
English or
représentant un
French,
globe
there
terrestre
is an
au bas de
icon
votre
on the
écran.
bottom of the Zoom call in
Cliquez
the form of a
dessus pour
globe.
sélectionner
If
la
you click
langue
on
dans
it,
laquelle
you'll
vous
be able to
souhaitez écouter
choose
le
the
webinaire.
language you would like to hear during today's webinar.
To start, we would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar in Mi'kmaq. This is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Walaquiac, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy people first signed with the British Crown in 1726. We feel it's important to keep this in mind and know and honor the land that we are on. The ICN works with many communities across Canada, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, as well as communities around the world in the international development sector. And we feel it's important to reflect on this, draw lessons from our colonial history and how this history intersects in many ways with the issues we are facing today in working towards a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. We ask that we all consider this and the lands on which we work as we participate in today's webinar. Please use the chat to introduce yourself, tell us where you are joining from, and comment on today's topic. I will pass this to Judy Annette to share findings and introduce Sydney.
Thank you so much, Solange. My name is Judy Annette, and I've been honored to facilitate the research that we'll be focusing on today. And I will share a few findings from the work, and then I will let some of the participants share directly, talk directly about the findings. So anyway, we have a few slides here. If we can get them up. Sorry. What are we? Okay. All right. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So if we go to the next slide. Okay. Everyone see that? Okay. All right. So we were looking at how organizations are using decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches in public engagement. And we wanted to understand the environment within which these approaches are being used, just to get a sense of what is working well and where we need to put more effort. And to do this, we had three key questions guiding our work. If we go to the next slide. Okay, yeah. So those are the three questions that we had guiding our work. So we did interviews, we did a survey and interviews and focus groups. And first, we wanted to understand what is working well in the use of these three lenses in public engagement. And then we wanted to identify some key challenges that are making the use of these three lenses in public engagement difficult. And finally, we wanted to understand what kind of support is needed to strengthen the sector's use of these three lenses in public engagement. So those were kind of the three main questions that were guiding our work. And I will share some of the findings, and then I will open it up for discussion. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what is working well, or some of the strategies that organizations are using in their work. And there's so many, and I will just highlight a few. And the first one that I want to talk about is we had that working with others and learning with others is a key strategy that is working well. And although we still have silos, in the sector, organizations are finding that working with others is helping generate new ideas and new ways of navigating the challenges that come with doing decolonial or anti-racist or feminist work, because this is really difficult time that takes time and resources, work that takes time and resources. So finding what others are doing and how they're navigating this environment has been helpful. I guess one of the other strategies that I want to highlight is internal practices. So from speaking to organizations and some of the people that took part in the interviews and focus groups, we are finding that increasingly organizations are doing some internal work and mostly to stay accountable, but also to learn as a team. And so we heard about things like check-ins and learning circles within teams, where teams come together to reflect and learn as a group. And although that kind of internal learning requires time, organizations find that investing in that time for staff or the team to come together to learn about decolonization, feminism, or even racism, and how to tackle that and how to use these lenses in public engagement is helping them integrate these principles slowly into their practices. So those are some of the ways that organizations are sort of trying to integrate and implement these three lenses in their work. And I won't, as I said, I won't highlight all the ones that we have up here, but we have a report that we're just about to finish that has all these details. So be on the lookout for that. We'll be sharing that soon. But I want to touch a bit on some of the challenges in the next slide. Okay, so we have so many challenges, but as you can all guess, resources remain a big challenge to the work, and most of the people we actually spoke to highlighted limited resources as a big barrier. And what they suggest is that there's still quite a bit of work that still needs to be done to ensure we are directing funds to public engagement work, especially public engagement work activities that integrate this equity and justice lenses in their approaches. So that's the first one that I want to highlight. And the second one, because I just talked about organizational policies and practices as a strategy, that kind of internal work and internal learning that's taking place. One of the other challenges is actually organizational policies and practices. And although, as I said, organizations are increasingly looking inwards as a team, our study finds that because decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist principles are not yet fully embedded in most of the institutional frameworks, organizations still are struggling to move beyond commitments to actions. So without aligning our policies, our internal policies and governance structures, things like hiring processes and how we allocate funds, efforts towards decolonial and anti-racist and feminist methods in our public engagement still remain limited, or they can even be counterproductive. So when we think about what needs to be done to move beyond commitments to action, it means that besides the rethinking and reimagining our programming, our public engagement work, we just have to look inwards as organizations and look at how power and decision making and responsibilities are distributed within organizations themselves. So those are some of the challenges that we found acting as a barrier towards using these lenses in public engagement. And I guess now I can talk a little bit about some of the support. Okay, so as I said, I'll just highlight a few. So as I'm sure most of us have experienced, in our work, the use of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist lenses in public engagement requires time and resources. And our study confirms this. And so time and resources to nurture the relationships that are required to do the work in this way, but also to do the internal work that I just talked about. So whether that's rethinking your policies and doing an equity audit, things like that, and making sure that your policies as an organization and your practices, they align with the principles that with the decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist principles. So that's kind of the first one, time and resources. And the second one that I want to touch on is I didn't touch on this when I was talking about challenges, but one of the challenges that we also found is there's still gaps in knowledge in the how of implementing these three lenses in public engagement. And this suggests that there's still need for more learning spaces. So collective learning emerges as a strong need, spaces where we can all collectively reflect and learn and come up with strategies to move forward. So things like learning circles, community gatherings, workshops, and trainings, there's still some need for that. And I think I will stop there for now. Those are some of the insights from our work, and I'm sure we have public engagement practitioners in the audience that use these approaches, and we're lucky today to also have some of the people that took part in the research, so you get to hear directly from them. But before I hand it over to Sydney, who's moderating today's conversation, that's our website on the screen there. Make sure to follow us to get notified when the report is ready to share. But anyway, now I will introduce Sydney. Sydney Piggott is a social impact leader, a researcher and an advocate for gender equity and social justice on a global scale. And she's currently the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives at Mentor Canada, and a national organization with a mission to accelerate world-class mentorship for youth. Now I will turn it over to Sydney.
Thank you so much for the introduction and also for framing the discussion with those incredible findings. I'm really excited to hear all the panelists today dive into that research and their experience as well. I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, also known as Treaty 7 or Calgary, Alberta. I'm really excited to be joining some 6 incredible panelists, and in order to give them the most time possible, I'm going to give very short bios, but please do go to the website and see all of the incredible work that they do. I also just want to do another reminder. I have a tendency to switch between French and English pretty often. I'm doing my best to do it in chunks, but please do turn on your interpretation if you haven't already. My first language is Franglais, so I have a very bad habit of speaking French and English at the same time. To start off, I'm going to introduce Carolina Palacios, who is the Deputy Executive Director of Oxfam Canada, where she leads organizational strategy, operational planning, reporting, and risk management. We also have Allison Kingston, who is the Executive Director at Rajon and has a Master of Arts in Migration and Diaspora Studies from Carleton University. We also have Marie-Claude Gelina.
As an educational designer, teacher, but training, she's applied her expertise in education around the world over 20-year career in the international solidarity sector.
We also have Tina Sweeney, who is dedicated to reducing inequality by engaging Canadians as a senior outreach and partnerships officer at CUSO International for over a decade. She connects civil society groups to build a sustainable future rooted in a shared humanity. We also have Cindy Paul, who is a community wisdom manager supporting Videa Canada's Canada Service Corps programming since 2021 with a land-based project in North Vermilion, Alberta. Cindy is a Métis Cree songwriter and recording artist who facilitates art, music, and film production and traditional health and community wellness workshops. We also have one of Cindy's colleagues, Kate Howard, who is a settler of British descent who lives in Tikaronto or Treaty 13 territory. Kate is the co-head of Canadian programs at Videa, a role she shares with her great friend and fellow Libra, Chantel Steen, which I love. My mom's a Libra, so I have a soft spot for them. I'm going to start off the conversation in French, so please do put on your interpretation.
Marie, I would start with you for our first question. What strategy or what tools have helped you or others to move beyond tokenism and toward meaningful integration of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist practices in your public engagement work? Marie, the floor is yours. No, I'm breaking the ice. All right. I think this is obviously a very rich question. I'll try and be brief. I think it's important to remember that when we're doing decolonial, anti-racist, feminist education, we need to first and foremost give space to the people who are primarily concerned, who are really working on issues of decolonization, of anti-racism, of feminism. There are more and more tools available online, more and more people who are available to come and speak. I think it's important to keep that in mind, even though it is quite a basic principle. It's an important one to start with. I also want to just speak a little bit about how in the different organizations that I've worked in, the importance of putting forward the agency of individuals. So rather than having a more passive discourse, to really always be putting forward the agency of different individuals. So I ran a campaign, for example, on women's rights, and our virtual platform was all women's groups who were presenting themselves, their actions, their initiatives, and the struggles that they were working on. So obviously, if we're touching on the fights that they're part of, the struggles that they're engaged in, we're talking about the problems that they're facing. But by avoiding, a passive voice, we really want to put forward the voices of the people who are actively engaged in this work. And the last thing I wanted to say, and as I said, I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible. Whenever I've engaged in public education, I've found that there are a lot of people who stay at this sort of initial level of understanding in the public. So let's say they see there's a problem with access to drinking water. They stay on this idea of there aren't enough wells. It's this really superficial level, we can say it, because unfortunately they've never been given the opportunity to really reflect on these questions. So if we engage in decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist education, we need to consistently remind people that these issues, these inequalities, are rooted in colonialism, white supremacy, are rooted in patriarchy. And to explain that fact historically, systemically, why these inequalities exist. And that is a long process, but I think that it's very important. And I'll give an example to conclude. I know a number of organizations that support schools who go and do trips out to countries in the global south. So people who are going for 10 days to Central America to help. And so, when you look even at the language used by teachers to present this type of project, you have to think about how organizations can support these groups, work with them to identify the causes of inequalities, to call into question the role of these young people who are going there to learn, to discuss, and they're sort of deconstruct this idea of white saviors. So when we really go to the roots, when we're a little more radical, I think that's when we can really engage in decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist education, or at least I certainly hope so. Thank you very much, Marie. I like that you launched the discussion at this systemic level to think about all of these issues at that level.
I'm going to pass it over to our next panelist, Tina, but I will repeat the question in English just to make sure that everyone's understanding. What are some strategies or tools that have helped you or others move beyond tokenism and towards meaningful integration of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist principles in your public engagement work?
Thank you for the question, Cindy, and merci à Marie Brodard, Janinas, pour briser la glace. Thank you for breaking the ice. So it might be a little repetitive. I think as practitioners, we're along this evolving stream. So I'll touch on 4 points and also be as brief as I can, but maybe I'll start off with a beautiful proverb that I think resonates with the work that we're all doing in this sector. And it's until the lion tells the story, the hunter is always the victor or the hero. And so in our collaboration and our work, I think it first starts with centering the community in and of themselves as the priority, as the storyteller, as the situation context analysis to lay the foundation. Collaboration is another point. So talking about the local partners and bringing those in when we're talking about the work that CUSO does in particular, the partnership and collaboration element goes hand in hand with kind of taking away the tokenism and really trying to dive deeper into decolonization. I really, a point around language. I think the language that we use really frames the conversation and could be a little difficult when others aren't using that language, but I think it's imperative of our work and ability to teach and inform at a level that is decolonizing and inclusive. And that is really around trying to really get rid of those stereotypes of poor and needy and allowing community members to speak for themselves about how they wish to be represented. And then kind of the alignment of partners. So, when we talk about that is who are we bringing into the conversation? And I work a lot with diaspora communities that have, a dotted line or a reflection of the communities of where we work. So bringing in diaspora to kind of ask those hard questions that we may not be as courageous to ask or critique or question, I think is the other element of strategies and tools that we can work around decolonizing and, just being very inclusive into how we approach public engagement as a whole. And I'll give it back to you, Sydney.
Thank you, Tina. I love the focus on partnerships. I feel like CUSO in particular is really familiar with building those trusting partnerships in the work that you do. So I love that you shed some light on some of the work that you're doing. I'd love to pass it now to Allison.
Sure. So I kind of want to start by kind of reiterating some of the things Marie and Tina said. Sorry, I live right by a busy road, so if there's a bit of traffic noise, I apologize. Tried my best. So I think Marie brought up a really good point about educating ourselves, understanding our positionality and not just our positionality individually, but also as people from Canada. Like as a white woman, my positionality is extremely important in everything we do. But it's also knowing that, these layers of identity become extra important. And my position in one context shifts depending on who we're speaking with and who we're working with. As well as Tina brought up a great point about bringing in diaspora members. For those who don't know where I'm from near Aamshinaaw First Nation, near Sarnia, which is a very, very white settler community. So when it comes to bringing in the diaspora, it's extremely important, but we can't stop with one member of the diaspora. I think a lot of smaller, more rural organizations kind of stop there. They say, oh, we have one diaspora member involved, that's plenty. There's our opinion, checkmark, tokenism type stuff. When it comes to more practical tools, though, is kind of the angle I wanted to take. So we use dignified storytelling. It's a whole structure of how to tell stories, how to work with people to gather stories as well. And I think it's important not just to use the own words of our community members, but also not to cut out the negative parts. I think a lot of times we adapt stories we hear based on what we're trying to tell. And I think that goes to the colonial view of adapting other people's information for our purposes. And I think we have to get out of that bubble and start towards using all aspects of stories and telling them the way the community members meant to have them told. I personally don't work directly in the field. We work more with local staff. And I think what that means is then our Canadian team has to be even more steeped into this dignified storytelling, because we're often getting things secondhand when we can't access community members directly. And I think it's also important to recognize that we don't have a right to the stories simply by providing the program. I think a lot of the time we receive testimonials and things like that that are either forced or coerced, and then they're either not showing the full picture, but they're also not dignified. You know, they're not a story that wants to be told in the way that it's meant to be. And it kind of harms the furthering of and making sure that what we're telling is from a decolonial feminist lens. So we also have to be open to hard conversations, that we can't always get it right, but you can control how you respond to getting it wrong. So I think all those pieces kind of put together, furthers what tools and what types of strategies that we can kind of use to keep pushing forward in our work, and especially through public engagement.
Thank you so much, Allison. I love that you shared that approach. If you have any links to how you do that work, it would be really great for, I think, the folks here to see some examples of how you do your storytelling. I'd love to pass it now to Kate and maybe talk about the work that you do at Videa. And Cindy, if you're available afterwards, it'd be great to kind of hear both of your perspectives on the work that you're doing.
Oh my gosh, for sure. I almost forgot my little AirPod mic. I just want to make sure you can hear me. Okay, this is a technical workaround, not my preference. I'm not, it makes me feel like an internet person. I don't think we have, moved beyond tokenism towards meaningful integration of these principles in our sector. At Videa, like our majority Indigenous staff team experiences tokenism regularly in our sector, as do we as an organization. An example of this organizationally might be, like we apply for funding, clearly outlining who we are and our approach. The funders see value in it and they fund us, and then they give us a hard time because we don't fit so cleanly into their boxes. But they will proudly share our work on Indigenous Peoples Day, for example. To me, meaningful integration of feminist, anti-racist, decolonial principles in our public engagement begins at hiring from within participant and community networks first, valuing lived experience over colonial credentials, board members that align with and are accountable to your organizational values, equitable pay, investing in the wellness of your staff, delineated like budgetary responsibilities, not accepting funding from entities that cause harm, creating spaces where your staff, your participants, and partners know that they can show up as their full selves, building relationships rooted in friendship and solidarity, rejecting professionalism and efficiency as like default measures of success, solidarity, hiring people that are already doing the work, amplifying, paying well, rejecting the idea that people should do this work out of passion, investigation of root causes from the turnover in your staff or retention in your programs to so recognizing root causes in public engagement in place of sort of these like surface level engagements. Another example, and again, these examples are like, made up but grounded in truth. Like an example might be a post celebrating the resilience of Indigenous women globally on conservation without any analysis around the unbelievable environmental harm caused by Canadian mining companies globally, for example. So yeah, I don't see it being meaningful until these systemic shifts, including like shifts in how we understand accountability and power, occur. I'm going to pass it over to you, Cindy. I hear you have something brilliant.
Yeah, exactly what she said. I agree wholeheartedly that, you know, we have not moved beyond tokenism by far, and we haven't even come close to reconciliation by far. And that's the root of the problem. Is we can throw around that word and a lot of fancy words, but we're not even close to that, because we have to reach a truth first, and like talking real truths to one another before we start, you know, putting a band-aid on things, because the wounds aren't going to ever heal if there's just a band-aid. And getting people, like as an Indigenous woman, I was asked a lot to come on certain boards or sing at certain events. I was asked when they first started doing land acknowledgements, I was always asked to do a land acknowledgement, and it was like so bizarre to me. I'm acknowledging my own land. Like there was just a lack of education around it. Why are you doing a land acknowledgement? So there's so many first steps that need to be done. Education on what a land acknowledgement is. With all your employees, like that should come before even a land acknowledgement is said. Like, why are you saying it in the first place? Who needs to say it? Because and then even to get you don't want an Indigenous person there, or somebody that's already vulnerable in their community, to be a token, to put a check mark on your box for a grant application. And that's essentially what it is a lot of times, because you have to have an elder there to get this grant. And it's like, it becomes to where that felt like I was just a check mark on a box without a voice. And that is like so lacking in integrity and truth. It's so far from reconciliation when we're just degraded down to a check mark. We need, for me, we have to acknowledge that first before we move on. And anything, you know, meaningful will come after that. And I get really emotional talking about it, because it's a lived experience for me. And I want to see changes out there. And I want to see where we're more than just a check mark or somebody who does a prayer or sing a song. I want to be at the table speaking. And that's where you have to move over and give people that are more vulnerable in you space to speak, and not only space to speak, space to make changes and have the opportunity to make decision making, because that's only when changes are going to be made. So that's kind of how I feel about that question. And also, when you're in community or going into community to work with other people, whether it be you know, feminist organizations, or you're thinking about people that are probably in less fortunate positions than you. I think, you know, a real good tool is to learn and research what community am I going in, what obstacles do they have and barriers do they have, and go in with that education and take the time to do all that education before you even go in there. And when you do go in there with and speak the same language that they're speaking, because a lot of time the forms, the grant applications, even the speeches, they're so foreign and to them that they don't even listen, because they can't even get around all the language and the words. So that's a huge barrier to somebody that's already vulnerable. So that's really important to me, that we have to really speak really clearly, really direct, and kind of get rid of all the fancy language in the forms and even when we're interacting with people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy and Kate. I think I really like that you pointed out specifically how dehumanizing tokenism is. It's a form of racism, and I think often people don't think of it that way, the harm that it causes to individuals and to broader communities. And I know I myself have experienced tokenism. I know probably other people on this panel have, and people who are listening. So I really appreciate you acknowledging that experience. And I also like how you both took it to the next level of not just tokenism, but the performative actions that a lot of organizations will do to just absolve themselves of white guilt. And we know that that's not actually systemic change. Like bringing it back to what Marie and Tina and Allison were saying is that that's not systemic. Taking a checkbox, it's not addressing a broader systemic issue. So really appreciate you sharing that. And for the final word on this question, Carolina.
Gosh, it's really, really hard to come after all these wonderful panelists have said all the key stuff. So I'll try to add more and perhaps also summarize. So from what we have learned, what helps is really understanding what is it that is really not working in the system that we work in, and understanding what needs to change and why needs to change. And a lot of the panelists have referred to a lot of those things. So you have the human resources systems that tend to prioritize a dominant group when advancing recruitment and promotions. You have this cultures where people do not understand or don't necessarily have the training or the awareness even that we are living in those environments that are racist, colonial, where there is patriarchy. What does it mean and how does it manifest in our systems? It's about the language. A lot of our panelists talked about the language that we use. Words matter. And so how in our system we tend to talk about charity and capacity building and beneficiaries and field and developed and developing nations. And so it's reflecting on that and how that brings it or highlights who has power and who is who doesn't have the power or is being deprived of the power, their power is being stolen from them. It's also this decision making. Who is making decisions on where the money is going? How is it utilized? How programs are designed? It's about advocacy initiatives that are designed in the global north and not reflecting or designed by the activists and the agents of change in the countries in which we work. It's about the white saviorism, the white gaze in the stories that we tell, in the pictures that we show, and trying to do fundraising where that is what's captivating the audience. So having that deep reflection, and there's many more things that the system, in which the system is highly imperfect. But just understanding what the problem is a good starting point to then start thinking, what is it that we need to, what is under our control to change? And so that led us to a path of, okay, how are we gonna change our recruitment practices? As some of our panelists mentioned, bring in the people that are representative of the diversity of the programs that we have, but not in a tokenistic way, but really bringing that sense of belonging and ensuring that anybody who joins the organization has the support, the training, the capacity to understand where we're failing, to be humble, to recognize also what we're doing wrong, and to know where do we strive to go. And it's about ensuring that we have all the people who work in public engagement that know what are the key messages that we are to convey. That is not us telling the story. We are the messengers, but the story is coming from the people our country offices, from our partners, from the activists in the ground who are doing all the work. And so it's not positioning our organization at the center, but making sure that we are just transferring that voice from them. And we are guided by our ethical content guidelines. So we have guidelines that identify what is it that we're going to say, how are we going to use pictures, how are we going to be responsible in the messages that we put forward. And also it's about the what stories are we telling. And it's not the stories about the sad people who are powerless and need us to come and rescue them. It's to change that. That's the traditional way. We want to move away from that. The people we're working with are powerful agents of change. They have the knowledge, they need the resources that we have and that we benefit from because of the colonial structures that have existed for centuries. So it's about solidarity, not charity. It's about collaboration. It's about building alliances. It's about building a big tent, a coalition of a big coalition of people who can work together in an imperfect way, as we all are, to try to change what's broken, and recognizing that we're failing often, not do it well, and how we can do it better next time.
Thank you so much, Carolina. I think this actually really leads well into our next question. And so that we have enough time, I'm going to kind of divide the group into two. So for the next question, 3 people will answer, and then for the following, the other 3 people will answer. So this, I'm picking up basically on what you're chatting about. So it's kind of a natural flow of what you answered for the previous question. The next question is, how do we navigate the tension between institutional mandates and the transformative aims of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist practices? I want to start with Kate, because you did mention that there is a tension between, for example, funders and the work that you need to do. I would love to hear kind of how you've navigated those tensions or suggestions that you might have for people who are watching today who might be grappling with that as well.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I wonder. We'll see if this is what you're going to say. I will say, like, I struggle with this question, with this idea that, like, institutional mandates are immovable. Like, there is so much misuse of terms like decolonial, anti-racist, feminist, reconciliation, accessibility in our sector without like meaningfully reckoning with what it takes to live and work by those principles in practice. And I think this, like, to me, the tension, the real tension is more about not maybe between like mandates and justice, mandates and these principles, but between like fear or resistance and the work it takes to shift power. I think like, it's part of IDEA's strategic plan to advocate for and support action towards meaningful integration of these principles with other organizations. And often what we encounter is this like fear, fragility, lack of will. People want like a checklist or an easy way through the discomfort, but it shouldn't be easy. It requires boldness and bravery and a willingness to do things differently and like collaboration. And it's like, it should be hard and exciting and your work will be better for it. But yeah, I think if we want to do the work we, claim to want to do, we all want to do, like, these principles enhance our ability to do it, not compete with it.
Thank you. I love those reflections. Carolina, sorry to pass it back to you so quickly, but I feel like this is kind of a natural next question for you. So would you like to comment on how you've done that at Oxfam or in other work that you've done?
Certainly. So the work involved is a systemic approach. You need to tackle it from various angles. So one is, for example, your policies. You need to have policies that are not just a piece of paper in a drawer. It's policies that are co-developed, let's say with the board of directors, that are developed with the staff, with the partners, that tell you how to work on anti-racism, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and decolonization. So having good policies in place that people understand, having your board on board with those changes, not only on board, but also that are champions of this. They need to be the ones pushing and holding organizations accountable for living those values. There needs to be strategies, so long-term strategies that that tell you what the goals are, where is it that the organization is going, and how you're going to be held accountable. Principles that guide the organization. So in our case, anti-racism and anti-oppression principles and feminist principles that everybody understand, and that we educate every board member, every staff, and even our supporters about what they mean. It's about ensuring that when we implement our initiatives, it's not about band-aid solutions. It's not parachuting with a bag of food and water. It's about understanding what are the problems. What is it that it's causing the inequality and the patriarchal systems, and then providing, working with the agents of change to see how we can be of value to them, and what is it that we can offer based on their own terms and their own needs. And so I would say that overall is, and again, I mentioned the systems with our staffing structure, the people we have around, having, and one of my fellow panelists mentioned is the people with whom we work, and the partners with whom we collaborate, and ensuring that we see each other as equals, and that understanding also our power imbalances, but we see each other as equals in trying to break into this horrendous imbalances and inequities that exist. So I think that's an important part of mandate. When you have all of these systems embedded throughout, and it's part of everything you do, then it's not longer a tension between your institutional mandates and what you do. It's part of what you do. If you're not doing that, then you're not doing your job. I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Carolina. I think this discussion of kind of ceding power is an important one. I will say, just to be like critical of the space, I honestly have not seen very many organizations cede power in a meaningful way in Canada, at least. And I think that there's a lot of work to do there. So this is a great way to start the conversation around what that actually means. It's more than an acknowledgement. It's really undoing and transforming systems. And so it's very glad to hear that this is the discussion that we're having, and I'd love to see how that happens in the international cooperation sector as we kind of understand that this is a really important issue.
And Mary, I'm going to pass it over to you. I'm just going to repeat it in French for everyone. So how do we navigate the tension between institutional mandates and, sorry, just a second, I'm stumbling over my word, from the institutional mandates and the transformative aims of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist practices. So I'm just going to add to what was already said. What really speaks to me is to name the power dynamics. What are the power inequalities? To name them, to question them, to acknowledge them. And unfortunately, what I've seen is these unequal power balances. What happens? They're just happening on this multilateral facade. And what I mean by that, it's with our funders, but in our hierarchical structures of different organizations, we will reproduce like it's the opposite of our mission, but we're just reproducing that structure internally between our different relationships. So I think we have to put back into question all these unequal power relationships, to name them, have that courage to speak it aloud. And it's, for me, that's something that's really important from everything I've heard, and something that we have to have the courage to do. And one of the first things that I just thought about was this question of what is representation? I wrote in my notes, representation matters. I wrote it in English because that's where I learned that concept from. And I liked, in our previous question, a lot of people denounce tokenism. It's clear for me, everyone clearly stated, we just like to listen, actually give or cede power or redistribute power. So I don't have anything new to add. I just want to underline what was said. It's incredibly valuable. Thank you so much for everyone who highlighted these important issues. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marie.
So for our next question, I'm going to pass it first to Cindy. I'd like to ask, how can we create space for ongoing learning, critical reflection, and dialogue with our teams and community of practices? So basically, how do we take this from just an acknowledgement to really creating that transformational change?
Yeah, when I was going through these questions, I was just trying to break them down. And I think making people feel safe is really important. I think creating a safe space for them to feel like they're being heard, and they have the answers in their own community. So going into communities and learning who they have there, their elders, instead of going in there with the mindset that you're going to fix things. I think that's a real problem, because they already have their own answers. They already have their own knowledge keepers, their own elders, their own people that they look up to. And I think sometimes that creates a real barrier, and people just get tired from not being heard. And that is the biggest barrier for ongoing learning, and even like creating a real safe place for dialogue. Have equality at the table. For me, like when I'm going into a meeting or something and there's somebody standing in front of the room looking down at everyone, it creates a real power structure. And we have to decolonize that. If we're going into communities, have a seat at the table with them and not stand over them, because that matters. When you're walking into your room, create a really safe environment, speak with people, not at people. And just have that awareness that the system was set up to speak at people, to tell them what to do. That's what decolonization is, breaking down. What is that system? What does it look like? How do we change that? How do we make people feel safe and comfortable? Because if they're hungry, if they're never slept at night, if their kids kept them up all night, there's so much going on in people's lives. Don't expect them to come and sit there and listen to you quietly without just being overwhelmed, tired. So there's so much going on already that it just gets so, like, I'm just so tired of it, actually, that, and in order for there to be systemic change, you have to just like say, hey, this is the way it is. This is what we got to do to change it. And really, it is nice to sit at a table with someone and have a relationship and a two-way conversation. And I think that's how things are gonna like move on and change. So thanks for listening.
Great reflection, Cindy. I think also the way that you kind of, as you were telling that story, it's also this entitlement almost to information that tends to happen when you're working with communities. It's like, oh, well, I brought some food to this, so they should be able to share their experience, or we gave an honorarium, so I'm now entitled to all of this information. But it's not actually a deliberate intention setting that you're doing with the person or with the community beforehand, and understanding like, what are we both going to get out of this relationship, instead of it being super extractive. So I kind of appreciate you framing that, and some of the things that everyone listening can do to actually make sure that that's not the case, and there is that at least attempt to have a better power balance. Although, that power balance is going to take more work than just like those one-on-one interactions. But thank you so much. I'd love to pass it to Tina to share some of your experience.
Yeah, I'm enjoying just listening. And learning a lot. I think, I think there's room, if we are calling, to have like learning, like this is the room to be in, right? Like you're participating, you're doing research. I think what happens a lot of times is we keep it amongst ourselves and, we know all the good work that we're doing, but how do you amplify that? How do you get the masses, so to speak, practicing best practices within public engagement? And I don't necessarily know the answer of how to get that out there, but we've said some things around language, just making sure that it is inclusive, like people actually get what we're trying to do and understand. And maybe like, working alongside is something that we do a lot. So I'm a facilitator like you, Sydney, in the public engagement sphere, but it is at a consciousness of knowing the time and resources that the important work's getting done. And so like drafts will be created, right? I'm not going to lie and say like, this is carte blanche, like just tell me what you want to do. Like there is some kind of loose elements of a scenario, but it really, well, maybe I'm delusional, but I do feel that there's an inclusivity and a voice that is given after I've kind of done the introductions, that it is the partner and or whoever's working in country explains kind of what's going on and I'm left out. And I just want to loop back maybe to something that Allison said around who like how she's being represented as a white woman. Like I may identify as a Black Canadian or an African Canadian, but I am not from those countries either, and neither are my parents. So I just because I have the skin color doesn't mean that I know more, although it might have a different like perception to a Canadian public that I'm mostly kind of engaging with. But I just want to say, I think there is room for real collaboration and that you can't underestimate kindness. And to Cindy's point, like just the joy and the peace and you have to come to the table where you're not like freaked out and rushed and you got to get this done by tomorrow. Like I think Judy Annette's analysis of time and resources at the very front of her research thesis is really key, because once you are mindful as an individual, and you can walk a mile or put yourself in another person's position of like, what is this Canadian counterpart asking me to potentially participate in, and taking the time to kind of have 10,000 cups of tea, as we like to say, or break bread, and just kind of have, meetings prior to the public engagement outward facing. I think all of these practices that all of these organizations, and it's a continuum, right? Like we might be talking about one aspect of PE, but PE has many different dimensions of it. And so we have to like keep that in mind as well as kind of our audience at the end of the day. But it really comes down like there's no shortage of opportunities from ICN and the ICN network and us if we wanted to kind of engage in deeper learning from one another. But also the papers are there, the research papers are there from ICN. So there's opportunity for public engagement working groups all across the board. And what would be nice is if we did something in collaborative, like together. I think as a public engagement outward facing, I think it would be an interesting opportunity to see best practices um, live in action.
That's a great point around how a lot of this work can sometimes happen in silos, or it can feel really isolating. And if there's more opportunity to kind of join together and do this collaboratively, also, I mean, I have an economics background, so I don't really believe in scarcity because it's like a fabricated thing, but we don't have to get into that right now. But there is kind of this scarcity mindset that exists that really inhibits that type of collaboration that can exist, whether it's like competition for funding or literally just we don't have the time, we don't have the resources to do this. So collaboration is a great way to overcome some of that while we also do the work of dismantling the system. So I love that perspective, Tina. And I'm going to pass it to Allison as well, but I did notice in the chat that Fatima asked if Mackie could briefly explain her last point. I don't remember what the last point was. So Fatima, if you could just share what you'd like more clarification on. And then after Allison has had the chance to speak, I can pass it back to Maggie. So Allison, please go ahead.
Sure, thanks. So Sydney, when you were summarizing Cindy's reflections, you used the word extractive. And I think that was maybe not intentional, but if it was, it's a great word to use, because I think that's often how we view storytelling, especially in this context, is we gave you this program, now you must give us something back. And I think when we expand that broader than just our programming, we also see that in terms of how we often view decolonial movement, how we often are sitting here, we come to webinars, we get all this information, we extract it all, but then we still expect someone else to do the work for us. We still expect, the work to be done without us doing it. And I think it's kind of like if you went to school and you go to a lecture, but you don't do the homework afterwards. And I think that's often the cycle we're getting caught up into in, public engagement, decolonial movement, away from, neocolonial ideas. The other thing I think is super necessary in spaces of learning, and I know, Tina, you mentioned this too, and so did you, Kate, at the beginning, but patience and getting away from this efficiency mindset that comes from, colonial capitalism. It comes from this whole idea of we go in, we do this, we do this, we do this, we get out. We have 10 minutes, we have to get this done in this 10 minutes, but that's such a different mindset than we should be entering spaces with if the purpose is for long-term growth, for long-term decolonization, long-term feminism, and even to do a good job. We need to get into the mindset of things take time, things aren't linear, and we need to be able to invest that time. I know it goes directly to the part of the research that Judina shared of that's one of the resources we're missing is the time and resources to be able to do this work. But unfortunately, there's no way around it. We just have to do it. We have to make time, we have to make effort, and get away from this efficiency mindset. And also to recognize that a lot of the communities we work in haven't necessarily been pushed to fully develop, like to fully be in this efficiency mindset either. So then we also have this direct conflict of us as Northern Canadians seeing things one way, and then trying to impose that also on the communities we work with. Going back to, what Cindy was saying of how we have to decolonize the spaces we're in to begin with as well. So I think those are kind of the two biggest pieces when it comes to learning, and kind of hindrances we've had thus far is this getting, like, we need to give patience and get away from efficiency, but then also we just have to do the work. Learning is extremely important, but we have to apply it as well. And I think that's something we're often missing.
Great reflections, Allison. I love that kind of reminder that we do have to move towards action and we do have a lot of learning. We've learned so much and now it's really time to do the hard work. And I feel like all of the panelists, you've really been reinforcing that. So I personally love to hear it. I'm really excited to see all the work that you'll accomplish with this in mind. Also, just wanted to flag, Fatima said that all good, that Marie's point was covered. So we are going to move to the last question. And I also want to bring in one of the questions from the chat because I think it's actually very relevant. Our last question is about how we measure success or impact in ways that don't reinforce this kind of colonial, racist, and anti-feminist structures that we exist in when it comes to public engagement. And someone in the chat actually specifically mentioned their experience being an international volunteer and saying that local organizations are still adapting their work to fit into funders' boxes. And that's something that a lot of people have chatted about. And specifically the question was, what are Canadian organizations doing to challenge Global Affairs Canada and other international funders on their practices? So I would love if we could kind of maybe combine those two questions and talk about how are you measuring success and impact, and how are you also using the stories that you're hearing on the ground in order to challenge these frameworks, especially when it comes to funders. So maybe I'll start with Tina on this one. If you have any reflections on how you're measuring impact in a way that's centering communities, but also that's challenging these structures that can be really harmful to the communities that you're serving.
Yeah, thank you, Sydney. So there's a lot of room for improvement and to get better when it comes to the meal. Like we do an extensive monitoring or evaluation around public engagement. Nonetheless, it is very quantitative versus qualitative. So I'll just be transparent there. I think as we've talked, like centering voices of community members and local partners, it would have to come from them as to where these measurement indicator, like we call them indicators, where what success might look like, versus me kind of spitting out what I think might be interesting. I think it's really, if we're gonna be truthful and do the hard work, as Allison said, then it is going back and asking, like, how do you measure success, and get an articulation of how they would like to measure it. We do the standard surveys afterwards, we capture all the data, but specifically to these thematic areas, it is not something outside of like understanding, like we do measure understanding benchmarks, but again, there's room for improvement. And what was this? Oh, I know so where can we push global affairs on some of this? So I'm not directly in contact outside of PE with global affairs, but I do know those centering conversations around first person narrative. So bringing people to Canada to actually talk about the impact, the work, the alignment, the synergies, the collaboration, like having them come here is definitely something we've been advocating for quite some time, and looking at our budgets to how do we have representation that is a first person narrative storytelling, dignified storytelling, to Allison's point, is something where we have been advocating for. Where that stands, we do it globally through virtual means because we can do that, but the physicality of travel outside of some other, big benchmarks or milestones hasn't happened on a regular basis. So that is something that we're pushing towards.
Marie, maybe I'd ask you if you have some comments about that. I know that you've worked with different international organizations like Oxfam Quebec, working on programs that were associated with Global Affairs Canada. So I don't know if you have any examples for how you might have measured the impact or how you've used those as opportunities to advocate for communities that you work with. It is very interesting because I haven't seen really any revolutionary practices. I've seen a lot of people who are stuck in this management practices focused on quantitative methods. My hope would be that organizations that want a more participatory approach would be able, to be involved as soon as a project is being developed, as soon as we're starting to work on a mission, a strategic plan, that people would be able to get involved, that people who are affected would be involved at every step of the process, and therefore, obviously, in developing indicators and measures. Maybe if we could get there, things could change a little bit from the inside. But I do think it's very interesting, this idea that by, daring to evaluate differently, we're also educating funders. We are influencing and advocating, even if it isn't, specifically an advocacy activity, but we're still engaged in advocacy if we can dare in how we do things. But I think it's a little bit more of a dream. It's a little further divorced from what I've actually seen on the ground, unfortunately. Well, thank you very much, Marie. I think it is very interesting to hear that this is something, that a lot of people in our sector are trying to work with to see how we could do things better. Try and think about how we could influence the systems in place in order to really have, from the very earliest design phases, to have something that imposes power less on communities, on the organizations that we work with. So even if there's no solutions on the ground yet, it's interesting to know that this is something that is being worked on. and sort of innovative solutions. So thank you for your comments.
I know, Kate and Cindy, that you're mostly working on Canadian programs or programs that are within Canada, but I know that Vidya also does have some international programs as well. So would love to hear from both of you or either of you what your experience has been around measuring impact and how you've been advocating potentially with funders to kind of avoid that difficult power dynamic in the work that you're doing.
So you said who, me?
No, sorry, Kate and Cindy.
Okay.
Both of us waiting for the other one
Yeah.
to answer. Do you want to go first? You want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first.
Sorry.
A lot more like buzzing outside the window. I'll keep it short and sweet because I have, I think, for me, I think we have to look more like long-term, building really healthy long-term relationships. Like a lot of the grants and the projects that we go into are short-term, like relatively short, like 1 to 3 years. And then it's over, then we do all our indicators and we, mark all our boxes and we put our information back in. But I think building lifelong and long-term and relationships with people is what's like a really successful measurement of success for me, I guess. Because if they want you to come back into their community and keep doing work, that's like the best measurement of success. And to build a really healthy long-term relationship with communities is great, because when your project is over, they still have the same problems in their community, and it's still ongoing. So if just because your project ends doesn't mean everything ends in that community. So to keep, even if your project is ending, keep some kind of relationship building to where they're open for other organizations to come in and fill their places, or even better yet, where they can build stuff within their community to start doing that work themselves in their own communities. So essentially, when we go into the community, we want to work ourselves out of a job. We want the people in the community to be doing these things. We don't want to just keep getting funding and money and keep going back and doing the same thing over and over and over. We got to go in there with a mindset we're going to work ourselves out of a job. So there could be, so there has to be like action put into place, not just the same kind of like thing over and over every time a project ends and starts, and then we measure it. And so yeah, some kind of action and good relationship building. And I'll pass it to you, Kate.
Amazing. Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, I'm just gonna like emphasize what Cindy said. I forgot my little microphone. You can't, you like can't avoid this power dynamic with the funders often, but we apply clearly stating our decolonial indigenized approach to monitoring. This like which is relational, it's community based, it's youth led. And then, we will often have to complete the dominant measurement approaches as well, which rarely, if ever, illustrate the actual success or impact of the work. And so then we work really hard to advocate and push for change and clearly show like the impact that's missed from the dominant frameworks. I mean, I think we, like Cindy said, it's like we know we're like doing good work when elders, youth, community members, partners tell us that. When people and organizations want to stay connected to us, when program participants refer their family and friends, when youth come out of their shells, when your posts are being shared, like all these amazing things that are not reflected in the dominant frameworks and that are often the success, the impact. And then also I keep coming back to this, but I think it is like evidence of shifts in your internal culture, people showing up more fully as themselves, questioning like the status quo, reflecting, sitting in like discomfort. I mean, I'll just give like a really quick example, but there's a really great project we have right now about movement building, and they are able in July of 2025, no less, this amazing 3 emerging leaders are able to get like upwards of 40 Indigenous youth on Zoom in an evening, like on an evening, to come and connect. And it's like in July of 2025, like that's honestly crazy. We know that's huge in terms, and they'll come back, they keep coming back, and then they actually like engage and meaningfully participate. We know that that's significant because we're aware of how things shift for our community seasonally, how people are out on the land, they're busy with their kids, they're at cultural activities, and still they're showing up. Which means it's like, it is impactful, it is successful. I'll leave it at that.
I love both of those reflections. Like the 2 things that I'll comment on is one around still grounding your impact, your organizational impact, or your program impact, whatever it is, in your own principles, and whatever the funder asks is what the funder asks, but that doesn't necessarily determine what success is for you. So I really liked the way that you kind of mentioned that unfortunately there are going to be some check boxes that your funder might ask for, but that doesn't mean that's how you or your community defines success. So I really like the way that you pointed that out. And then Cindy, on your point of tell a super short story, but I'm Jamaican. That's like kind of where I'm from. And it's really funny because you were mentioning how these projects are really short, like 1 year, 3 years, sometimes even 5 years. And I always think about the whole history. Like literally Columbus came to Jamaica. We had the Spanish colonization, the British colonization, we had the transatlantic slave trade, we had indentured servants from China who were coming, we had structural adjustment programs and predatory trade practices from the US that happened over 500 plus years. And it's like, in what world is a 3-year project going to solve that, or even part of that? You know what I mean? And it's just really shocking because I know this is the story for so many people, and genocide of Indigenous people across the Caribbean as well. It's like, how could we possibly resolve this in a 1 to 3 to 5, even to 10-year project? You know, it's not going to be a project realistically to undo a lot of this harm. So I really like that you pointed that out, because that's also a really big challenge when it comes to these funding conversations. And I was able to say that in 2 minutes, but it's still not going to change the fact that they're probably still going to fund a 3-year project to try and solve some type of deep systemic issue. So I know that that's really the reality for so many of the communities that we're working on, or that we belong to and that we live in. So I appreciate you shouting that out, because it really does feel very ridiculous to me. And I know to many of you who are also struggling with this in the funding space. So Allison, I wonder if you also have some insight on how you do this work.
Yeah. I want to preface by saying I've been in my role for about a year, just over a year now. And I had an amazing predecessor who really pushed our organization from kind of a very neo-colonial way of working to one that's very community driven now and community focused. We're always community focused, of course, but different. So I just want to shout out Heather before I start this conversation, because she's the one who really did a lot of this work in our organization, and I'm just here getting to tell you about it. So I wanted to start kind of reflecting on, going back to the very first question and answer about language. So we don't use the language of project anymore. We use the language of program, because it indicates to our communities that we're working with them for a long time, and that this isn't short fix. These aren't short solutions, right? So I think that's one thing just in language we can use to kind of signal to our communities that we're not just going to abandon them after the 3-year funding might end. We'll have to find different funding. We have to shift. The other thing we do as an organization is we don't apply for GAC funding anymore. So not to get too deep into the long history of this, but basically after CETA split and got reformatted into GAC, we realized that the ways that they're working don't align with the ways that we work, and we're unable to meet what they want with the ways that we work in community. So we don't actually take or apply and get GAC funding anymore because of that, because of those restrictions and the kind of ways it sometimes forces us to work in certain ways with communities. Now, of course, if hopefully there they're shifting in the next few years. So hopefully there's a space that we can re-enter that, because obviously that funding boost would be wonderful. But for a small organization, when it doesn't align, we can't fudge our numbers. We can't fudge the work we do. We can't change the work we do to match that. And then we're lucky to also have other large donors who recognize that and work the way that we work, and they're aligned with us. So one of our large donors actually came to us because they had this great idea for a project in one of our communities. And my predecessor, had a conversation with them being like, we don't work that way. This is what we do. Would you like to support us? And then they do support us. So I think having those conversations with funders and actively choosing which funding streams to go for. Of course, that's easier said than done, especially we're a small organization with a small overhead. So we totally have a different structure than, someone as large as Oxfam. So this is obviously one specific situation. So I think that's huge on the funding side. Just one quick thing to touch on with the public engagement side of things, to show how we're measuring success in the Canadian sphere, if we're hitting those, stories that are framed decolonially, is actually listening to how people interpret our stories and how they retell the stories in the Canadian context. So clearly, if we tell a story and then someone repeats it using different framing, we didn't hit our mark. So I think that's another area in the Canadian context of public engagement that's important, and just, one of those metrics that we can try to reach slightly. I'll leave it there because we're short.
No, that's awesome. And I also want to shout out that Solange put in the chat deprojectizing as, I guess, a term that you've now coined, Allison. And I think it's a great way to frame this conversation. I want to hand it to Carolina for the final word on our last question.
Wow. Okay. So I want to tell a story that I think helps me frame what I'm gonna end with. When I was a teenager, and I'm from Colombia, I met this guy from France, and I remember he was telling me how come in France we have the roads that are like this, and you guys you have these roads that are like that, and in France we are transportation system and our education system, why don't you have these things here? And I don't understand why this and that about my country. And I remember feeling so angry then, and I didn't have the words to, or the self-awareness or the knowledge to understand where the anger was coming from. And now that I work in this sector and working on this every day, I think for us, success means helping people understand how colonial systems help organize the world the way it is, how development for Canada or for other global northern countries came with a price, and the price was paid by Indigenous communities here in Canada. It was paid by other communities in other countries. This development wasn't free. And so helping people understand the privileges that we have right here come with that price. And communities are still paying that price. Climate change is affecting everyone. And I have my AC on right now. And I have my car. All of these things that we own, that we use every day, other people are paying for that. With floods and droughts, they are paying. So understanding that in this system, what we have, it's our responsibility to contribute, because it's not a charity. We benefit from this, and so it's changing that way of thinking, helping people understand, and especially young people. A lot of them now in public engagement, a lot of them understand this very well. They were raised in the climate change crisis. And so how can we as organizations raise that and not only changing how we see things, how we say things, but helping them, bring them all along, engaging them all together, listening more than we speak. And when it comes to GAC, I think that's where the power of the people comes from. I mean, we can engage with the bureaucrats, we can send letters, but it's the people, all of us, who can, if we understand this, then the people put pressure on the government. The people say, this is how we want things to go. And I think we need to do both, and we do as Oxfam focus on the bureaucrats, focus on the the politicians, but it's the people where the public engagement, the power of public engagement needs to be brought up, needs to be aligned with all of these principles so we can make a change. It's not gonna be, it's gonna take a while because the systems of colonization have been built for centuries. It's not going to be destroyed in a year, in 5 years, but it will if we continue working.
I love that, Carolina. Such a great way to conclude the discussion. And I also want to just comment on your story that you told. Yeah, how many times have I heard comments like from, for example, British tourists coming to Jamaica or something like that? And it's like, you should be really impressed that despite all these efforts to destroy everything that we had here or everything that we've built, that we've still managed to keep it alive, And I think in Canada, that's definitely real. There continues to be so many efforts to destroy the land and the place that Indigenous people have been keeping for over 10,000 years. And despite that, they haven't been successful. So it's actually very impressive. Maybe there isn't a perfect road, but it's really impressive that communities are able to do that globally, and especially here in the land that we're occupying. So I think that's a really good reminder of that resilience, but also a reminder of how much work we still have yet to do. So we're almost at the end, and I do want to give the ICN team an opportunity to have some closing comments. I did want to pop into the chat in case anyone missed it, the dignified storytelling link that Allison shared. And if any of the panelists, if you have other things you'd like to share, please do pop them in the chat so people can check it out.
So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for being here, all our panelists. Thank you for being here for this intense 1.5 hour conversation. It was so important to share this information within our sector, to really talk about how we can improve our practices at a local level, national level, and international level. So I really appreciate all your time, your reflections, and for your spending an hour and a half with us.
And I also want to say a big thank you to the ICN team who put this together and for inviting me to moderate yet another discussion. I hope you're not all bored of me, but I love doing this and I love learning from all of you. And I also want to shout out our interpreters who always do such a fantastic job of making sure that this conversation is available in French and in English. It's not an easy job. Even as someone who's bilingual, I do struggle with the back and forth between the languages, as you heard from me stumbling over my words. So really just want to say thank you so much to them as well for making this conversation available in English and French. So I'll pass it back to Judy Annette for the final word, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sydney, and thank you to our panelists. I hope we're taking some notes back to our work, so thanks for sharing your insights. I know we're just about to end, so I have a few things to say and then we'll go. So as I said at the beginning, we are finalizing the report and we'll be sharing that soon. So follow us on social media, sign up for newsletter so that you get notified when that's ready. And we'll be sending out a feedback form. If you can give us some feedback, that would be helpful for future conversations. I think that's pretty much it for now. Thank you so much to my colleagues for helping set this up and providing tech support and everything. And thanks for everyone who made the time. I know it's summer, it's, I'm actually very impressed that we have all these people here. So thank you so much for making the time to join the conversation today. And if you have any other questions, you can send us a note and we can pass them along to either the speakers or to us as the ICN, and we'll get back to you. I think that's pretty much it for now. I think I thanked everyone, didn't I? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a good time. And yeah, hopefully we'll keep the conversation going.